Captain Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and looked around the massive space station. Harmony Prime was the biggest thing he had ever seen. The walls curved up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of aliens walked through the wide corridors, their voices mixing into a strange symphony of sounds he could not understand. "Stay close to me," Jake told his team. Commander Lisa Parker walked beside him, her blue uniform crisp and clean. Behind them came Chief Engineer Ben Tucker, who kept looking at everything with wide eyes, and Strategic Advisor Amy Collins, who was quietly taking notes on her tablet dot. They were here for the ceremony. After 50 years of trying, humanity had finally been accepted into the Galactic Federation. Jake felt proud, but also nervous. Earth had worked so hard for this moment. A tall reptilian creature approached them. Its skin was dark green with silver, markings that seemed to move in the light. Jake recognized it from the pictures in his briefing files. This was Ambassador Zektar of the Vorthan Empire. "Welcome, humans," Zektar said in perfect English, though his voice sounded like gravel. "In a metal bucket. I am pleased to meet the representatives of your species." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand. Zektar looked at it for a moment, then reached out with his own clawed hand. The shake was brief and felt like touching cold leather. "Thank you for having us," Jake said. "We are honored to join the Federation." Zektar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Of course you are. Come, the ceremony will begin soon. But first, we have something for you." They followed the ambassador through corridors filled with beings Jake had only seen in videos. There were the Nexari, tall and thin with silver skin that gleamed like metal. Their eyes were large and completely black, and they moved with perfect coordination. The Zelani looked more familiar, almost human, but with blue-tinted skin and elaborate markings on their faces. "The Federation has a tradition," Zektar explained as they walked. "Every new member receives a starter package of technology to help them contribute to galactic security." They entered a huge room filled with weapons and equipment. Jake had seen similar things in Earth's military museums, but these looked more advanced. Energy weapons lined the walls, their surfaces smooth and alien. Armor suits stood in neat rows, and small fighter craft hung from the ceiling. "These are appropriate for your current development level," said another voice. Jake turned to see an Nexari approaching. Its movements were so smooth, it seemed to glide across the floor. "I am Counselor Vex Prime," the Nexari said. Its voice had no emotion at all, like a computer speaking. "These weapons have served the Federation well for many cycles." Ben Tucker stepped forward and picked up one of the plasma rifles. Even Jake could see it was old. The metal was worn smooth in places, and the design looked clunky compared to the sleek Nexari technology. "How old is this?" Ben asked. "By your measurements, approximately 200 of your years," Vex Prime replied. "But they remain functional and effective." Jake watched his engineer examine the weapon. Ben had served in the colonial wars on Mars, where equipment failures meant death. Jake could see Ben's mind working, looking at every part of the old rifle. "The shields are basic but reliable," Zektar continued, gesturing to a rack of personal shield generators. "The fighter designs are simple enough for your pilots to master quickly." Amy Collins was taking pictures of everything while making notes. Jake noticed she was paying special attention to how the alien weapons were organized and stored. As a strategic advisor, she was trained to notice patterns. "This is very generous," Jake said carefully. He could feel his team's disappointment, but he kept his voice neutral. These aliens clearly thought humans were primitive. A new voice joined the conversation. "The ceremony approaches." Jake turned to see a Zelani female approaching. Her blue skin had intricate silver patterns that seemed to tell a story. Unlike the others, she smiled when she looked at the humans. "I am Ambassador Nell Sarah," she said. I apologize if my colleagues seem direct. They mean no offense. None taken, Jake replied, though that was not entirely true. Nelsera looked at the weapons display. These served us well in our early days with the Federation. They will serve you well too, I am sure. Ben Tucker set down the plasma rifle and picked up a shield generator. It was the size of a dinner plate and felt heavy in his hands. Jake watched his engineer turn it over, examining every surface. The power source is interesting, Ben said quietly to Lisa. Looks like they used a different approach than we would. Different. How? Lisa asked. More stable, but less efficient. Safe, but not optimized. Jake filed that information away. Ben Tucker could make a rock shoot lasers if given enough time and coffee. If he saw potential in these old weapons, maybe they were. Not as useless as they appeared. The ceremony itself was impressive. The main hall of Harmony Prime held thousands of beings from across the galaxy. Jake and his team stood on a platform while speakers from each major species welcomed humanity to the Federation. The Vorthan speaker talked about strength and honor. The Nexari representative discussed efficiency and progress. The Zelani ambassador spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit. When it was Jake's turn to speak for humanity, he kept his words simple. We are grateful to join this community, he said. Earth looks forward to contributing to galactic peace and prosperity. The applause was polite, but not enthusiastic. Jake got the feeling that most of the audience saw this as a formality. Humans were the newest and least advanced species in the Federation. They were expected to follow, not lead. After the ceremony, Jake and his team were given a tour of the station. They saw advanced laboratories where Nexari scientists worked on projects Jake could not begin to understand. They visited training facilities where Vorthan soldiers practiced with weapons that could destroy a building with one shot. They observed Zelani diplomats managing communications with dozens of worlds simultaneously. Impressive, is it not? Zektar asked as they watched a group of Vorthan warriors sparring with energy swords. Very, Jake agreed. But he was thinking about something else. All of these aliens were incredibly advanced, but they all seemed to do things the same way. The Vorthans always attacked directly. The Nexari always chose the most efficient solution. The Salani always tried to find common ground. That night, back on their ship, Jake met with his team in the small conference room. The Ranger's dream was not much to look at compared to the alien vessels docked nearby, but it was home. Well, that was humbling, Lisa said, pouring coffee from the dispenser. They think we are children, Amy added. Those weapons are museum pieces. Ben was still examining the plasma rifle they had been given as a sample. Maybe, but they are not junk. The design is solid, just old-fashioned. Can we work with them? Jake asked. Ben smiled. Captain, I can work with anything. The question is whether we want to work with them the way they expect or the way we need to. Jake leaned back in his chair. He had commanded ships in the outer colonies, where everything was always breaking down and supplies were always short. You learned to make do with what you had, or you died. These Federation species had never faced that kind of desperation. What are you thinking, Ben? I am thinking these weapons were designed by people who never had to improvise. They work exactly as intended and no other way. But what if we used them differently? Amy looked up from her notes. How differently? I do not know yet, but I have some ideas. Jake stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, he could see the alien ships in their docking bays. They were beautiful and powerful, but they all looked the same within each species. No variations, no modifications, no signs of individual creativity. Admiral Sullivan wants a full report when we get back, Jake said. What are we going to tell her? That we have been given a gift they do not understand, Lisa said quietly. They think they gave us their old junk. But what they really gave, US was a chance to show them something new. Ben held up the plasma rifle. This thing has potential they never imagined. And so do we. Jake nodded. The Federation had welcomed humanity, but they expected humans to follow the established patterns. They wanted Earth to be a junior partner, grateful for hand-me-down technology and content to take orders. But Jake Morrison had not fought his way through the colonial wars by following someone else's rules. Neither had his crew. And if the Federation thought humanity would be satisfied with playing by their book, they were about to learn something about human nature. The ceremony was over. The real work was about to begin. 6 months had passed since the ceremony at Harmony Prime. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Adams stood on the bridge of the transport ship heading towards Sigma Draconis. Through the window, he could see the asteroid field where the joint training exercise would take place. Thousands of rocks floated in space, some as small as cars, others as big as cities. First time working with the aliens? Asked Commander Lisa Parker, who was checking her tablet for the 100th time. First time leading them, Ryan replied. He had studied every report from human contacts with the Federation species. The Vorthans liked direct attacks and overwhelming force. The Nexari preferred perfect planning and technological superiority. The Zilani focused on coordination and information sharing. What do you think of our chances? Lisa asked. Ryan smiled. Depends on what we are trying to win. The exercise was supposed to be simple. A mining colony on one of the larger asteroids was being attacked by raiders. The combined Federation forces had to protect the miners and drive off the attackers. It was the same scenario that every new Federation member had to complete. Standard peacekeeping operation, Ryan had read in the briefing. Follow established protocols and demonstrate competency with Federation equipment. But Ryan Adams had not become a lieutenant colonel by following other people's protocols. He had earned his rank in the Martian Rebellion, where human forces were always outnumbered and outgunned. You learn to think differently when you are always the underdog. The human ships arrived at the exercise, area looking shabby compared to the alien vessels. The Vorthan dreadnoughts were massive and covered in weapon ports. They looked like flying fortresses designed to destroy anything in their path. The Nexari ships were sleek and silver, their surfaces so smooth they seemed to bend light around them. The Zilani vessels were smaller, but bristled with communication arrays and sensor equipment. The human ships looked like they had been built in someone's garage, which, Ryan thought, was not entirely wrong. Earth's shipbuilding industry was still young, and human vessels were designed to be repaired and modified in the field. They looked rough, but they were tough. Federation Marshal Kethvox was in command of the overall exercise. The old Vorthan warrior had been fighting for 300 years, and his ship alone carried enough firepower to level a small moon. He looked at the human vessels with what Ryan assumed was disappointment. Humans, Kethvox said over the communication channel, his voice a low growl. You will follow standard Federation tactics. Protect the colony. Eliminate the raiders. Simple. Understood. Marshal, Ryan replied. But he was already thinking about how to make it not simple at all. The exercise began at 08:00 hours. The simulated raiders appeared on sensors, approaching the mining colony from 3 directions. According to Federation doctrine, the defending forces should form a protective perimeter around the colony and engage the raiders at maximum range. The Vorthans immediately moved to intercept the largest raider group. Their dreadnoughts formed a battle line and began firing their massive energy cannons. The display of firepower was impressive, but Ryan noticed they were doing exactly what the exercise planners expected. The Nexari ships positioned themselves to cover the flanks with precise movements. Their targeting systems locked onto raider vessels with perfect accuracy. Every shot was calculated for maximum efficiency. But again, they were following the script. The Zelani took position in the rear, coordinating communications and providing sensor support. Their ships fed targeting data to the others and managed the flow of information across the fleet. Professional and effective, but predictable. Ryan watched all of this from his command ship while his ground forces prepared to deploy. Major Pete Williams led the infantry, while Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez commanded the armor units. Both had served under Ryan in previous campaigns, and both knew that their commander did not like to do things the expected way. "What are your orders, Colonel?" Pete asked over the radio. "Tell me what you see," Ryan replied. "I see 3 groups of aliens fighting exactly the way their training manuals say they should fight," Pete answered. "No surprises, no creativity, just textbook tactics. And the raiders? Following the exercise script. They are attacking where they are supposed to attack, when they are supposed to attack." Ryan smiled. "So what do you think we should do?" "Something they are not expecting," Maria added. "Something that is not in any manual." "Exactly." Instead of deploying his ground forces to defend the colony, Ryan sent them to the asteroid field itself. While the alien fleets engaged the raiders in space, human soldiers began moving through the floating rocks using their jetpacks and magnetic boots. Ben Tucker had spent the last 6 months modifying their Federation weapons. The plasma rifles now had variable power settings that the original designers never intended. The shield generators could be linked together to create mobile barriers. Most importantly, the communication equipment could be used to jam enemy sensors. "What are the humans doing?" Marshal Keth Vox demanded as he watched human soldiers disappear into the asteroid field. "Following orders, Marshal," Ryan replied. "Protecting the colony." But Ryan was not just protecting the colony. He was turning the entire asteroid field into a weapon. The raiders, following their programming, expected the defenders to stay near the mining station. They did not expect human soldiers to be hiding among the asteroids with modified weapons. When the raider ships moved into attack formation, they found themselves flying into a trap. Maria Gonzalez had positioned her armor units on the larger asteroids, using their magnetic clamps to anchor themselves to the rock surfaces. When the raiders flew past, the human tanks fired their plasma cannons from unexpected angles. The modified weapons had been overcharged to create wider blast areas, filling space with energy that forced the raider ships to change course at the yaw. Same time, Pete Williams and his infantry were using the communication jammers to confuse the raider targeting systems. The enemy ships suddenly found their sensors filled with false signals and ghost images. They began firing at shadows while human soldiers used the confusion to reposition. But the real surprise came when Commander Lisa Parker brought her ships into play. Instead of engaging the raiders directly, her vessels began pushing asteroids out of their orbits. The human ships were not as powerful as the alien vessels, but they were more maneuverable. They used the asteroid field like a pool table, bouncing rocks off each other to create a cascade of moving obstacles. The raiders found themselves dodging not just weapon fire, but also massive chunks of rock moving at high speed. They're careful. Attack formations broke apart as they struggled to avoid collisions. Marshal Keth Vox watched in amazement as the exercise scenario fell apart. The raiders were supposed to press their attack for 30 minutes before being driven off. Instead, they were retreating after 15 minutes, confused and demoralized by tactics that were not in any Federation manual. How did they do that? Asked Nexari Counselor Vex Prime, his artificial intelligence struggling to analyze what had happened. They used the environment, observed Zelani Ambassador Nelsara. They turned the asteroid field into part of their defensive system. The Vorthan. Marshall was quiet for a long moment. They fought like pirates, he finally said. No honor in it. But it worked, Nell Sarah pointed out. When the exercise officially ended, the results were clear. The human forces had achieved all objectives in half the expected time with minimal casualties. The colony was protected. The raiders were driven off, and the asteroid field was still intact. But the alien observers were not celebrating. They were concerned. "This is not how Federation forces fight," Marshal Kethvox said during the debriefing. "There are protocols. There are proper procedures." "And we followed them," Ryan replied calmly. "We protected the colony and eliminated the threat." "You used the weapons incorrectly," Vex Prime stated. "Plasma rifles are not designed for area suppression. Shield generators are not meant to be networked. Communication arrays are not intended for electronic warfare." Ryan looked around the room at the alien commanders. These beings had technology that could destroy planets, but they could only think of using it in the ways they had always used. With respect, Counselor, the weapons worked exactly as we needed them to work. The mission was successful. "Success is not the issue," Marshal Kethvox growled. "Discipline is the issue. Order is the issue. If every species fights differently, how can we coordinate our efforts?" "Maybe coordination means more than just doing the same thing," Lisa Parker suggested. "Maybe it means using everyone's strengths." The room fell silent. The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions Ryan could not read. Finally, Nell Sarah spoke. "The humans raise an interesting point. Perhaps we should consider their methods more carefully." But Ryan could see that. Most of the aliens were not interested in considering anything. They were upset that humans had not followed the rules. They were worried that human tactics were too unpredictable to control. As the debriefing ended, and the various fleets prepared to return to their home bases, Ryan found himself talking with his own officers. "They are scared of us," Pete Williams observed. "Not scared," Maria Gonzalez corrected. "Confused. They have been doing things the same way for so long. They cannot imagine any other way." Dr. Susan Mitchell stared at the message on her computer screen for the third time. The words had not changed, but she kept hoping they would. The Federation Science Council was demanding that Earth correct its military training programs immediately. "They want us to fight like them," she said to her assistant, Dr. Carlos Rivera. "Follow their rules, use their tactics, stop being creative." Carlos looked over her shoulder at the message. "What does Admiral Sullivan say?" "She says we keep doing what we are doing, but quietly." The message had come from Nexari Counselor Vex Prime, whose artificial brain could calculate the trajectory of every star in the galaxy, but could not understand why humans refused to follow simple instructions. The Federation was upset about the training exercise at Sigma Draconis. Word had spread quickly through alien command centers that humans were using weapons incorrectly. Susan closed her laptop and walked to the laboratory window. Outside, she could see the orbital shipyard where human engineers were working on new vessels. But the real work was happening in secret, in the underground facilities where Ben Tucker and his team were discovering things that the Federation had forgotten. Ben Tucker had always been good with machines, but the Federation technology was teaching him things he never imagined. Working with Helen Davis and a dozen other engineers, he had been taking apart every piece of equipment they had received from the aliens. "Look at this," Ben said, holding up a plasma rifle power cell. "This thing has enough energy to run a small city, but they only use 10% of its capacity." Helen examined the cell under a microscope. "The safety systems are incredible. Multiple redundancies, automatic shutoffs, emergency containment fields. But all of that limits what the weapon can do. They built these things to be safe, not effective," said engineer Danny Park, who was working on shield generator modifications. "Every system has limitations built into it to prevent misuse." Ben smiled. "Good thing we specialize in misuse." The Federation species had been using the same technology for thousands of years. They had perfected it, refined it, made it completely safe and predictable. What they had not done was think about what else it could do. Humans were different. Coming from a world where resources were limited and dangers were constant, they had learned to see possibilities everywhere. A tool designed for one job could be modified for another. A weapon with safety limits could have those limits carefully removed. "Show me what you have found," Susan said as she entered the workshop. Ben led her to a table covered with modified weapons. The plasma rifles looked the same on the outside, but inside they had been completely rebuilt. The power systems were modular now, allowing soldiers to adjust energy output in the field. The targeting systems could be linked to other weapons for coordinated fire. Most importantly, the weapons could be reconfigured for different missions. Within minutes, we tripled the effective range, Helen explained, quadrupled the power output, and added 17 different firing modes that the original designers never considered. What about the shield generators? Susan asked. Danny Park activated a small device on the table. A shimmering energy field appeared around it, but this shield was different from the Federation standard. Instead of a simple dome, it formed complex shapes that could be adjusted in real time. "We can network them now," Danny said. "Link 50 generators together to create a moving defensive wall, or separate them to provide individual protection, or configure them to reflect energy back at attackers." Susan was impressed, but also worried. What happens when the Federation finds out what we are doing? "They already know something is different," Ben replied. "But they do not understand what. Their minds work differently than ours. They see a weapon as having one purpose, one correct way to use it. We see potential." The proof of Ben's words came 3 weeks later when the emergency alert sounded across. All human facilities. The hegemony, an enemy empire that had been fighting the Federation for decades, had launched a surprise attack on the border world of Haven-7. The planet was home to 3 million Federation citizens and served as an important supply depot. More importantly for humanity, it was defended by a small human garrison led by Major Pete Williams and Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez. "We have 48 human soldiers on that planet," Admiral Sullivan told the emergency meeting, "against an estimated 5,000 hegemony troops with advanced weapons and adaptive artificial intelligence." The Federation fleet was 6 hours away. The hegemony forces would control the planet long before help arrived, unless the human garrison could hold them off. "What are their orders?" asked General Ryan Adams, who had been promoted after the Sigma Draconis exercise. "Survive," Admiral Sullivan replied, "and try to protect as many civilians as possible." But Pete Williams had no intention of just surviving. When the hegemony ships appeared in orbit around Haven-7, he was ready with a plan that would have terrified any Federation commander. Haven-7 was a mining world with a complex underground tunnel system. The planet's surface was covered with processing plants, storage facilities, and transportation networks that connected everything together. Most Federation defenders would have tried to hold fixed positions and fight a conventional battle. Pete Williams decided to make the entire planet his weapon. "Maria, take your squad and rig the main power plant," he ordered over the radio. "I want you to be able to overload it on my command." "Copy that, Major." "What about the civilians?" "We are moving them into the deep tunnels. But first, we are going to give the hegemony something to think about." The hegemony forces landed in 3 waves, their adaptive AI calculating the best way to take control of key facilities. They had studied Federation tactics for decades and knew exactly how the defenders would respond. What they had not studied was human unpredictability. Instead of defending the spaceport, Pete Williams blew it up before the enemy could use it. Instead of protecting the communication center, he turned it into a massive jamming station that filled the airwaves with noise. Instead of holding the government buildings, he booby-trapped them with modified Federation weapons set to overload. Maria Gonzalez and her team had spent weeks preparing for something like this. They had hidden weapon caches throughout the tunnel system, stockpiled modified ammunition, and mapped every maintenance shaft and service corridor on the planet. When the hegemony troops tried to advance into the city, they found themselves fighting. Not just human soldiers, but the city itself. Traffic control systems had been reprogrammed to create massive pileups that blocked major roads. Environmental controls were used to flood certain areas with steam or drain others of breathable air. Even the automated mining equipment had been turned into remote-controlled weapons. "This is not possible," transmitted the hegemony commander to his fleet. "These defenders are using civilian infrastructure as military assets." The hegemony AI tried to adapt, but human creativity was moving faster than artificial intelligence could calculate. Every time the enemy forces developed a counter-strategy, the humans had already moved on to something else. Pete Williams was in his element. This was exactly the kind of fighting he had trained for during the colonial wars, where outnumbered human forces had to use everything around them as a weapon. "Danny, can you overload those shield generators we placed around the hospital?" he asked over the radio. "Sure thing, Major, but that will create a pretty big explosion. That is the idea. Wait until the hegemony troops are in position, then light it up." The explosion that followed was visible from orbit. It was not just the shield generators overloading, but a carefully planned chain reaction that brought down 3 city blocks in exactly the right pattern to trap an entire hegemony battalion in a maze of rubble. "How are they doing this?" demanded the hegemony fleet commander. "Their weapons are inferior. Their numbers are insignificant, yet they are winning." The answer was something the hegemony could not understand. Humans were not just using their weapons differently. They were thinking differently. Where the enemy saw obstacles, humans saw opportunities. Where the enemy saw limitations, humans saw potential. Maria Gonzalez demonstrated this when her squad was cornered at a mining facility by superior forces. Instead of surrendering or fighting a hopeless battle, she used the facility's ore processing system to create a landslide that buried the enemy troops under tons of rock. "Beautiful work," Pete Williams said when he heard the report. "What is your ammunition status?" "Running low on standard rounds," Maria replied. "But we have plenty of mining charges and industrial equipment. Then keep improvising." The battle continued for 6 hours, with 48 human soldiers holding off thousands of enemy troops. They used weather control systems to create artificial storms. They reprogrammed construction robots to attack enemy positions. They even used the planet's satellite network to drop communication relays on enemy forces, like bombs. By the time Federation reinforcements arrived, the hegemony forces were in full retreat. Their adaptive AI had given up trying to predict human tactics and simply ordered a withdrawal. Marshal Keth Fox could not believe the reports. 48 soldiers defeated 5,000? "Not defeated," Pete Williams corrected over the radio. "Frustrated. We made it too expensive for them to stay." "How is this possible?" The emergency session of the Federation High Command took place on Harmony Prime, in the same chamber where humanity had been welcomed 2 years earlier. But this time, the mood was very different. Supreme Commander Zex Kala, the ancient Zalani strategist, called the meeting to order with a heavy heart. Her blue skin had grown pale with age, and the silver markings on her face seemed dimmer than before. She had seen the Federation through many crises, but this one felt different. "The defense of Haven 7 has raised serious questions," she announced to the assembled representatives. "Questions about human methods, about Federation unity, and about our future together. War Prime Grok Tor, The massive Vorthan general slammed his clawed fist on the table. His red eyes glowed with anger as he spoke. The humans are dangerous. They do not follow orders. They do not respect tradition. They turn everything into a weapon, even civilian buildings. Their tactics are chaotic, agreed Nexari counselor. Vex Prime, his artificial consciousness analyzing thousands of battle scenarios per second. Our predictive models cannot account for their behavior. They act without logic. But Selani Ambassador Nell Sarah disagreed. Perhaps we are looking at this wrong. The humans saved Haven 7 when our forces could not. 3 million lives were preserved because 48 human soldiers refused to surrender. At what cost? Groktor growled. They destroyed half the city. They violated every rule of civilized warfare. What happens when other species start? Copying their methods? The debate continued for hours, with no clear resolution. Some Federation leaders wanted to restrict human activities. Others suggested closer supervision of human forces. A few even proposed removing humanity from military operations entirely. Then the alarm started sounding. "Supreme Commander," announced a technician, his voice shaking with fear. "We are receiving emergency signals from 3 core worlds simultaneously. Kepler Prime, New Geneva, and Titan Station are all under attack." The chamber fell silent. Core worlds were the heart of Federation space, protected by massive defensive fleets and orbital weapons platforms. An attack on one core world was serious. Attacks on 3 at the same time meant only one thing. "The hegemony," Zexkala whispered. "They have been planning this." The tactical display showed the scope of the disaster. Hegemony fleets had appeared without warning at all 3 locations, their adaptive AI systems having finally cracked Federation. Defensive patterns. Years of studying Federation tactics had paid off, and now the enemy knew exactly how to counter every standard response. "Our fleets are being overwhelmed," reported the technician. "Kepler Prime's orbital defenses have been neutralized. New Geneva is requesting immediate evacuation. Titan Station has gone silent." War Prime Groktor stood up, his massive frame towering over the others. "We must dispatch all available forces immediately. Full mobilization. With what tactics?" asked Nell Sarah quietly. "They know how we fight. They have countered everything we can do." Nexari Counselor Vex Prime was running calculations at superhuman speed. Probability of successful defense using standard Federation tactics is 12% and decreasing. The enemy AI has achieved tactical superiority. Supreme Commander Zexkala looked around the chamber at the greatest military minds in the galaxy and saw defeat in their eyes. For the first time in Federation history, their enemies had become smarter than they were. Then Admiral Kate Sullivan spoke from the human section of the chamber. "Give us command of the defense." The suggestion was so unexpected that everyone turned to stare at her. Admiral Sullivan had been quietly observing the debate, but now she stood with confidence that surprised the alien leaders. "You cannot be serious," Groktor said. "Humans have no experience with fleet command. You have been Federation members for only 2 years. "Exactly," Sullivan replied. "We have not spent centuries learning how things should be done. We can try. Things that you would never consider." "This is not the time for experiments," Vex Prime stated. "Lives are at stake. Entire worlds hang in the balance. Which is exactly why you need someone who thinks differently than the enemy expects," Captain Jake Morrison added, standing beside his admiral. "The hegemony AI has studied your tactics for decades. It knows how Federation forces will respond to every situation, but it has never faced human command decisions." Zexkala was quiet for a long moment, her ancient mind weighing impossible choices. Finally, she spoke. "What do you propose?" Admiral Sullivan activated her tablet and displayed a battle plan that made every alien in the room uncomfortable. "We Give General Adams command of all Federation forces in the affected sectors. We let him coordinate the defense using human methods. Impossible, Groktor declared. Federation fleets cannot be commanded by junior species. The chain of command is sacred. The chain of command is failing, Sullivan pointed out. Your sacred traditions are getting people killed. General Ryan Adams stepped forward, his expression calm despite the magnitude of what was being proposed. Supreme Commander, I understand your concerns. But right now, the enemy is winning because they know exactly what you will do. Give us a chance to surprise them. The debate that followed was intense but brief. 3 core worlds were under attack, and traditional Federation responses were proving inadequate. Finally, Zexkala made the most difficult decision of her long career. General Adams, you are hereby granted emergency command authority over all Federation forces in the affected sectors. May the stars forgive us all. Ryan Adams wasted no time. Within minutes, he had established a command center staffed with both human and alien officers willing to try new approaches. Commander Lisa Parker took charge of fleet coordination, while Ben Tucker and his engineering team began emergency modifications to Federation ships. Show me what we have available, Ryan. Ordered. The tactical display revealed the scope of the challenge. The hegemony had deployed massive fleets to each target world, using overwhelming force combined with precise knowledge of Federation defensive capabilities. Traditional strategy would call for defending each world separately, trying to hold strategic points until reinforcements could arrive. Ryan Adams threw traditional strategy out the window. We are not going to defend 3 worlds, he announced to his mixed human-alien staff. We are going to abandon 2 of them and concentrate everything on Kepler Prime. The alien officers looked shocked. Sir, that means sacrificing billions of lives, protested Azalani captain. No, it means saving them, Ryan replied. Lisa, how long would it take to evacuate the civilian populations from New Geneva and Titan Station? Commander Parker consulted her data. 18 hours minimum, assuming we use every available transport. And how long before the hegemony forces secure those worlds? 6 hours, maybe 8 if we put up token resistance. Ryan smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Then we give them token resistance. Make them think they are winning easily. Meanwhile, we use those 18 hours to turn Kepler Prime into the biggest trap in galactic history. What followed was a masterclass in human military thinking that left the alien observers struggling to understand the logic. Instead of trying to hold 3 defensive positions, Adams deliberately weakened 2 of them to strengthen the 3rd. He made New Geneva and Titan Station look like easy targets while secretly moving their populations and resources to safety. The hegemony AI, programmed to exploit Federation predictability, could not understand why human forces were retreating so quickly from 2 worlds while reinforcing the 3rd. Every calculation suggested that humans should try to defend all 3 positions equally. They are not following optimal defensive patterns, the hegemony commander reported to his fleet. But their behavior appears to indicate panic rather than strategy. Meanwhile, Ben Tucker was working miracles with Federation technology. Ships designed for long-range combat were being modified for close-quarters fighting. Defensive platforms were being reconfigured as mobile weapons. Most importantly, support vessels were being turned into primary attack units. This is madness, observed Marshal Kethvox, as he watched human engineers strip the defensive shields from medical ships to install them on fighters. You are violating every principle of fleet design. We are using every tool available, Ben replied while welding a plasma cannon onto a supply transport. The enemy expects certain ships to behave in certain ways. What happens when a hospital ship starts shooting back? The trap was set at Kepler Prime, where Ryan Adams had concentrated the entire remaining Federation fleet in what appeared to be a desperate last stand. The orbital defenses had been reconfigured in ways that made no tactical sense to observers. Ships were positioned in formations that violated basic military doctrine. When the hegemony fleet arrived at Kepler Prime, expecting to finish off the last Federation stronghold, they found something completely unexpected. The humans had not just prepared a defense, they had turned the entire star system into a weapon. The battle began with the hegemony forces advancing in perfect formation, their AI calculating optimal attack vectors based on decades of studying Federation tactics. What they encountered instead was chaos that somehow worked. Federation ships that should have been defending fixed positions suddenly became mobile assault units. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the observation deck of the new Federation Strategic Command Center, watching mixed crews of humans and aliens work together with an efficiency that would have been impossible a year ago. The center was built using human design principles, with modular sections that could be reconfigured based on changing needs. It was a physical representation of how much the Federation had changed. "Hard to believe it has only been 18 months since Kepler Prime," said Supreme Commander Zex Kalla, joining Kate at the window. The ancient Zelani leader looked younger. Somehow, her silver markings brighter and more vibrant than they had been during the dark days of the hegemony crisis. "Sometimes change happens fast when it has to," Kate replied. She watched a team of Vorthan engineers working alongside humans to install new defensive systems. The sight would have been unthinkable before the war, when each species kept to their own methods and traditions. The Federation had learned hard lessons during the hegemony attacks. Their rigid tactics and predictable strategies had nearly cost them everything. Now, training academies throughout Federation space taught what they called the human protocols, courses in adaptability and creative problem-solving that complemented traditional military education. "Your people have given us more than victory," Zex Kalla continued. "They have given us a new way of thinking about challenges." Kate smiled. "We just showed you what we learned from necessity. When you do not have the best equipment, you learn to use what you have in the best way possible." In the engineering section of the command center, Chief Engineer Ben Tucker was demonstrating the latest breakthrough in adaptive technology. A group of mixed-species engineers watched as he modified a standard plasma rifle in real time, changing its configuration to meet different tactical requirements. "The key is modularity," Ben explained to the fascinated audience. "Instead of designing weapons for one specific purpose, we design them to be reconfigured. A rifle becomes a support weapon, becomes a demolition charge, all with simple field modifications." Engineer Helen Davis added, "We have applied the same principles to ship design, defensive systems, and even communication networks. Everything can be adapted to meet changing conditions." One of the Nexari engineers, whose artificial intelligence had been enhanced to understand creative thinking, raised a question. "But how do you maintain efficiency with so many possible configurations?" "You do not," Ben replied with a grin. "Efficiency is less important than effectiveness. Sometimes the best solution is not the most elegant one." This was a concept that the Nexari were still struggling to understand, but they were learning. Their perfect algorithms and optimal calculations had been proven insufficient against enemies who thought like humans. Now they were incorporating randomness and intuition into their decision-making processes. The Vorthans had undergone perhaps the greatest transformation. War Prime Groktor, who had once dismissed human tactics as dishonorable, now commanded a mixed unit that used both traditional Vorthan strength and human adaptability. His soldiers learned to see honor not just in direct confrontation, but in protecting others through clever strategy. "I was wrong about your people," he admitted to General Ryan Adams during a joint training exercise. "I thought honor meant following the old ways. You taught me that true honor means finding the best way to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Ryan watched Vorthen and human soldiers working together to solve a complex tactical scenario. Honor and effectiveness do not have to be enemies. Sometimes the most honorable thing you can do is throw away the rulebook to save lives. Commander. Lisa Parker had become the captain of the Federation's first truly adaptive response vessel, a ship that embodied everything humanity had taught their alien allies. The vessel could reconfigure itself for different missions, with modular sections that could be rearranged as needed. Her crew was mixed species, trained in both traditional Federation procedures and human-style improvisation. Contact on long range. Sensors, reported her tactical officer, a young Zelani who had learned to think like a human while retaining his species' natural coordination abilities. Unknown configuration, approaching the neutral zone. Lisa studied the sensor readings. A year ago, first contact with an unknown vessel would have followed strict protocols. The Federation ship would have maintained safe distance, transmitted standard greeting messages, and waited for the alien vessel to respond according to established diplomatic procedures. Now Lisa had options. What do you think, Navigator? She asked her Vorthen navigation officer. The vessel appears damaged, but not hostile. Its trajectory suggests they are seeking assistance rather than confrontation. Tactical assessment? Her. Nexari weapons officer computed multiple scenarios instantly. If hostile, they pose minimal threat. If friendly, they may require immediate aid. Recommend cautious approach with readiness for either scenario. Lisa nodded. This was human-inspired thinking at work. Instead of following one rigid procedure, her crew was prepared for multiple possibilities and ready to adapt their response based on what they discovered. Take us in slowly. All hands, prepare for possible rescue operations and possible combat. I want us ready for anything. The unknown vessel turned out to be a refugee ship from a species the Federation had never encountered. Their world had been destroyed by a natural disaster, and they were seeking a new home. Traditional Federation procedures would have required weeks of diplomatic negotiations and bureaucratic approvals before any assistance could be offered. Lisa Parker made a different choice. Using the authority granted to adaptive response vessels, she immediately provided medical aid and emergency supplies while transmitting a request for diplomatic support. By the time Federation officials arrived to begin formal first contact procedures, the immediate crisis had been resolved and the refugees were safe. You violated 12 different protocols, observed the Federation diplomatic officer when he arrived. And saved 300 lives, Lisa replied calmly. I can live with that violation. This kind of thinking had spread throughout Federation space. The rigid hierarchy that had once defined military and civilian operations had been replaced by a more flexible system that encouraged initiative and creative problem-solving. Officers at every level were trained to think beyond their immediate orders and consider the larger picture. Dr. Susan Mitchell, now Director of Federation Adaptive Research, oversaw programs that would have been impossible under the old system. Human and alien scientists worked together on projects that combined the best aspects of multiple approaches to technology and strategy. We are not trying to make aliens think like humans, she explained to a gathering of Federation science leaders. We are trying to make everyone think more broadly. Humans are good at adapting and improvising, but we have much to learn from Vorthen determination, Nexari precision, and Zelani coordination. The real test of the new Federation came when long-range scouts detected hegemony forces massing near the galactic rim. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning another major offensive, but this time they had learned from their previous defeats. They have been studying our new tactics, reported the intelligence officer during the emergency briefing. Their AI has been upgraded to counter adaptive strategies. Admiral Sullivan looked around the command center at the mixed crew of humans and aliens working together to analyze the threat. Then we give them something new to study. The response. to the hegemony threat was unlike anything in Federation history. Instead of massing fleets for a direct confrontation, Admiral Sullivan and General Adams developed a strategy that used the entire Federation as a weapon. Trade routes became supply lines. Civilian transports became reconnaissance vessels. Even diplomatic missions carried hidden military components. When the hegemony forces finally attacked, they found themselves facing not armies, but entire civilizations working together with a coordination that their AI could not predict or counter. Every ship, every station, every inhabited world had become part of a defensive network that adapted faster than the enemy could respond. The war lasted only 3 months, ending with the complete surrender of hegemony forces who could no longer predict or counter Federation responses. But more importantly, it demonstrated that the Federation had fundamentally changed from a collection of separate species following rigid rules into a truly unified civilization capable of creative cooperation. Years later, when Admiral Jake Morrison looked back on humanity's entry into galactic civilization, he realized that the Federation's gift of outdated weapons had been more valuable than anyone had imagined. Those primitive tools had forced humans to think creatively, to see beyond limitations, and to find solutions that did not depend on having the best technology. They gave us their old weapons, thinking we would be grateful for scraps, he told a gathering of young officers from multiple species. Instead, they gave us the greatest gift possible. They gave us a reason to prove that the weapon is not as important as the mind that wields it. The new Federation bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had existed before humanity's arrival. Ships designed with modular components served alongside traditional vessels. Mixed crews combined the strengths of multiple species.